Welcome to another special edition of Ram Country. I'm your host, Dave Willauer, and it's my pleasure to be bringing you a three-part series of special programs on beginning beekeeping. My wife and I began beekeeping about 3 years ago, and so we have the opportunity to share all about beekeeping, which is a very popular topic right now. On the first show, we talked about why anyone would want to be a beekeeper, what the reasons were, and then we also talked a little bit about the life cycle of honeybees, the different types of bees that you'll find in a beehive, the worker bees, the drones, and the queen. And then we also talked about the jobs that a honeybee, a worker bee, will go through during their life cycle. On this program, I'd like to first talk about a brief history of beekeeping. If you take a look at this picture, it's a picture of one of the queens of Egypt being served some honey on her stack of pancakes. And I have to admit that I did Photoshop that stack of pancakes in there. I don't think pancakes were quite invented that many years ago, but nevertheless, the early Egyptians were the first known beekeepers where they actually tried to domesticate bees. And I want to remind you that bees are not domesticated. They are wild creatures. The job of the beekeeper is to keep a good environment, a welcome environment for those bees, and keep them as long as you possibly can. Because if the bees decide that they want to find another home, they will leave. They will take their queen with them, and they'll take either the whole colony or 2/3 of the colony, and they'll get reestablished somewhere else. Perhaps you've seen a swarm, a swarm of honeybees. And those can be collected and put back into a hive to be kept commercially. But a lot of times they go out into nature and establish a hive in a bee tree. And the next picture shows just that. This is a hollow tree where bees have taken up residence. If you look closely in the hole in that tree, you can see that there are bees in there. They have built comb. The next picture shows a cross-section of a bee tree. And you can see the comb, those folds of comb, those waves of comb, bee comb, and there's brood there in the center where the worker is holding his hive tool. And I can't see any honey there, but you can see lots of bees. And that's something that they are very good at developing out in nature. So our job as beekeepers is to try to create that ideal environment, that ideal habitat. If you look at this cave painting, it's between 8,000 and 15,000 years old. Scientists don't know exactly how old it is, but it shows someone going up a ladder of some sorts with a bucket in his hand, collecting honey from a wild or feral bee colony. You can see the bees, of course they're exaggerated in size a little bit there. The bees are flying around. Another old picture shows some ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, and you can see some honeybees, the beekeeper there on the left, and then some tubes in the center. And those tubes were how the Egyptians kept their colonies, kept their beehives. If you look at the next picture, you can see some of those tubes that are actually still in use over in Egypt and in those areas. They would take those tubes after a bee colony was installed or took up residence in that tube, and they would build them into a wall. The next picture shows that wall. And one of the problems with keeping bees in this manner is that in order to collect the honey, you have to destroy the colony. And once the bees are out of the colony, they become disorganized. They don't know where their queen is. Other colonies will not accept them because they have the scent or the pheromone of that colony. And so they realize that they're just really on their own and there's not much purpose that they're going to serve anymore. So that's a real problem. And when bees were plentiful, not a big deal. We've heard a lot of talk, and perhaps you've seen this online or on television, about the flow hive. If you look at the next picture, there is a shot of a flow hive, and it's just as easy as that. You have bees in your hive, you put tubes into the side of that, turn a crank, and your bucket fills up with honey. Well, unfortunately, that is not the way beekeeping actually works. It's the way the flow hive works to collect the honey, but you still have to work, and there are lots of tasks to take care of bees properly. The next picture shows the design of the flow hive. The crank on the left is turned, and those cells are then broken apart, and the honey that the bees have produced just simply flows down into a chamber. The next shot shows that chamber. It shows the honey dripping down into that bottom collecting tunnel, I guess you could call it. And then the next picture shows that honey coming out into a collection jar. If the flow hive works as well as it's been projected to work, and the flow hive is something that was developed by an Australian father and son team, and they've sold thousands of these. We have some folks in our Montgomery County Beekeepers Organization who are trying the flow hive. Then it really will help the bees, because every time you go into a beehive to check on the bees, to work, to feed them, to collect the honey, you're going to kill some bees. And it could be as many as 100, 150 bees each time you go in. Now with 10,000 to 50,000 workers in a hive, that doesn't seem like a lot. But you want to protect your bees as much as possible, because they do tremendous amount of work especially during that nectar season, the nectar flow season, which is in May and June, April, May, and June. Continuing to talk about the history of beekeeping, if you look at the next shot, you can see a skep. A skep is made of rye straw. It's a basket of sorts. There's a hole in the side of it where the bees would have it as their entrance and exit. And this is how beekeeping was done in colonial America, up through the mid-1800s. But again, the problem with keeping bees in this manner is what you can see on the next shot. This is an old photograph, an old black and white photograph of the inside of a skep looking in the bottom. And you can see those folds of wax comb, of honeycomb in there. To get that out, you have to destroy the colony. And that was a downside. Then you had to go out and find another colony somewhere and install it in your skep for the next season. A man by the name of Reverend L.L. Langstroth was responsible for developing the modern beehive as we know it. Reverend Langstroth discovered, as he studied the bees and studied how they formed comb in a skep, something that he called the bee space. Bees will build comb to within exactly 3/8 of an inch of each other. They will not build the comb any closer than that. And that 3/8 inch space provides the spacing that is needed for two bees to be able to pass while they're working inside of a hive. And so he developed something called the Langstroth hive. On the next slide is a picture of our hives, and they are Langstroth hives. This is a picture that was taken on a hot day, and the reason I can tell that is because the lid of the hive, the outer cover, is angled up to allow some ventilation. You can see the hive in the foreground. The boxes are offset, again, to provide some ventilation. And the hive on the far side has some shims between the top box and the middle box. You can see how it's angled up, and again, that provides some ventilation. The bees like it warm in their hive. Even in the wintertime, they keep an area of the hive at 93 degrees. That's why they need so much honey in the wintertime to maintain that temperature. But they don't like it too hot. If it gets above 105, 107 degrees, then that becomes a problem. So you do have to monitor that. There's a diagram that I'd like to share with you next, which shows a cross-section or a cutaway of the Langstroth hive. You can see that in each box there are 10 frames. And I have one of those frames with me that I'd like to show you. This frame is made of plastic foundation. Here's a close-up. You can see the honeycomb-shaped impressions on this piece of plastic. And this whole piece of plastic is dipped in beeswax, and that encourages them to build on those little honeycomb shapes. They extend the walls of each honeycomb cell out, and that is where Langstroth's 3/8 inch bee space came in very important. The bees build to that point, and then they stop. It enables you then to be able to take each one of those frames out and examine it, to take a look at it. If you continue to look at the diagram, you can see that the bottom box is where the bees are going to raise their brood. That's where the nursery is, that's where the queen spends almost all of her time. And there's some beekeepers who will place a queen excluder between the deep super and the honey supers that are placed on top. The bees always store their surplus honey in the attic of the hive, the upper part, the top boxes. And so those honey supers are located in the top. The reason that the queen excluder is sometimes placed there is so that the queen doesn't go up and begin laying eggs in those honey supers. You don't want brood to be mixed in with the honey that you're going to be collecting. Each hive has an inner cover and an outer cover. I also have an inner cover here that I can show you. This is a used inner cover, and it looks like it's dirty, but it actually has been sealed with a substance that the bees make called propolis. And you can see that they have sealed every little crack and nook and cranny there. They make propolis out of tree sap, and there are builder bees that fill in all of those cracks, and they try to make the hive as watertight and as airtight as they possibly can. They even do that between boxes. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. If we go back to the diagram, that inner cover communicates to the bees, okay, so you have to stop. That's as high as you can go to build your comb. And then the outer cover, it provides weatherproofing. If you look at the bottom of the hive, there is a hive stand, and there is also a bottom board that provides some security for the bees. In the summertime, that can be replaced with a screen bottom board. And in the front of the bottom board, there's a little bit of a reducer there to reduce the entrance. That's to help keep other bees from other colonies from going in and robbing the hive, robbing the stores. So let's talk a little bit about setting up the hive and installing the bees. One of the first things that you have to do when you purchase your hive is you either have to paint it or dip it in wax. I have a picture of the boxes of our first hive when they were painted, and you want to paint it white. Usually a light color is a good idea, help to reflect the heat a little bit. And then you build a stand, and our stand was 18 inches off the ground. That deters skunks from bothering the hive. If it's on the ground, a skunk will dig and dig at the front entrance and try to get in there, but it's too much trouble if it's that far off the ground. It's important to select a good location for your hive, and the next diagram shows a couple of the considerations that are important in selecting a location. You want the prevailing winds to be at the back of the hive. Bees can actually fly pretty well. They can fly up to 3 miles away from the hive to gather pollen and nectar, but they're not real skilled at landing, unfortunately. And so if the prevailing winds are at the back, it's a little bit easier for the bees to land at the front of the hive. Also, the openings of the hive are on the front, and having the wind at the back keeps the hive warmer in the wintertime. Now, it says on this diagram that you want dappled sunlight, and if you could have dappled sunlight all day long, that would be fantastic. I don't have that luxury, so I have my hives located in a place where I capture the morning sun. The hive warms up quickly as soon as the sun comes up. They can get busy and get working, gathering pollen and nectar, and then it shields them from the hot afternoon sun as the sun starts to go to the west. You want to have some type of easy access also. Those boxes of honey that you take off the hives can weigh as much as 40 or 50 pounds each, so you don't want to be carrying them for too much of a distance. And then finally, you want to have a water source. And the hives need, the worker bees need the water source for their hive for a number of different reasons. In the summertime, to cool the hive, and secondly, because they use the water just because they need to drink, and they need to use it to make the comb and the propolis and the other substances that they make in the hive. I'd like to share with you a cartoon next, which shows a dad with the words "clear cut" on his mower cutting the lawn, and his son is saying, "Dad, I think we have to talk about the bees and the flowers." A lawn, a well-kept lawn, a cut lawn, serves no purpose really in nature. We like it because it's a place where we can relax and can enjoy, we can play games out in the yard and so on, and it's a good thing for that reason. But it doesn't benefit bees, and it doesn't benefit nature in any way. So if you have the opportunity to let part of your property grow up and get a little wild with flowers and so on, that's a good thing. That is going to help to support the bees in a couple of different ways. And there are a number of different flowers that you can plant as well. This chart shows some suggestions for some ideas for planting in spring, early summer, high summer or midsummer, and then late summer as well. The bees need a constant source of nectar and pollen in order to continue to producing brood and to continue producing that honey, not only that we're going to collect, but the honey that they're going to need in order to make it through the winter. Just a couple of weeks ago, I heard a presentation by Peter Lintner, and he has made it his life work to research the garden plants that are beneficial to honeybees. And this is an amazing book. It's organized by month and tells you what plants are good for bees, and he has a rating scale for both the concentration of nectar in a plant and also the amount of protein that is found in pollen. I didn't realize this until Mr. Lintner told us, but some pollens have as much as 43% protein. That's almost twice as much as you'll find in chicken. And so bees are wanting to find that rich pollen, which is really what they need to feed their young as well. So take a look at different online sources and so on, different types of plants that you can plant to help encourage bees. Let's talk a little bit more about installing the beehive. This is a picture of my wife installing the frames in the first hives that we set up, would be 2 years ago. And those are inserted, 10 in each box. If you look at the next picture, you can see what the top of a hive looks like with all those 10 frames inserted. You can see there's that 3/8" space between each one of the frames. Now the equipment that's needed is a little different. Some of it can be adapted, but there's nothing like using your own gadgets. And as a guy, I am a gadget person, and so I'd like to share with you some of the tools that you can use. The first picture shows a smoker. The smoker, you can see there's some smoke coming out of the top, the cone part at the top. And I brought my smoker in with me. It's getting a little bit beat up because it is used on a regular routine basis. The top flips open and you put some type of fuel in there. It could be pine needles, it could be paper egg cartons, it could be newspaper or packaging paper. And you create a fire in here and then you put the lid back on so that the fire goes out and that smoke is produced. The bellows provide air, an air source. I'm blowing some of the ashes out of the top of the smoker. Provides an air source, and it also enables you to blow some of the smoke down into the hive. Now, if you've watched the Bee movie with Jerry Seinfeld, the smoke in that movie makes the bees get all kind of groggy and sleepy. I haven't found that to be the case. When I blow the smoke into the hive, it seems like the bees start buzzing more vigorously. It seems like they know that there's some type of a problem or issue happening. And they go down and they begin immediately to engorge themselves on the nectar that's in their hive. They're going to take on as much as they can just in case they have to leave the hive. I'll show you how effective a smoker is. If you look at the next picture, you can see the top of a hive when I've just taken the lid off the top. Now, there's no way I'm going to reach in there and move any of the frames that those bees are sitting on. But take a look at the next picture. That is literally 15 seconds later after blowing just a few quick puffs of smoke on top of those bees. They get very serious about going down and getting that nectar. And if you look at the next slide, you can see them doing just that. They are engorging themselves on the nectar that is down in the hive. One of the next tools that you use is the hive tool, and you can see it sitting on the corner of the hive there. I brought my hive tool with me. It's kind of like a little pry bar, a little crowbar of sorts, and I do use this. This is one you can get at the hardware store. And this one is the actual bee tool. It has a very sharp blade on it. Notice I didn't clean my hive tool intentionally. I want you to see the propolis that's on there. And the only thing that gets that off, the bees make that with tree sap, is denatured alcohol. So there's a sharp blade here for scraping the propolis off, for removing excess or errant comb. You use that blade to get between the boxes and crack that seal that they've made with the propolis. And then this is the most important part here at the end. That is a little bit of a lift that is used to pull those frames up. And we have a little bit of video that we'll show you a little bit later that demonstrate doing just that. So if you take a look at the next slide, you can see that the next tool that you use is something called a bee brush. And it's just a simple brush that is used to kind of encourage the bees to move along, to move in the direction that you want them to, or to vacate a direction where a location where you're working. And the bees don't like this. They try to sting it and so on. There are a lot of beekeepers that don't think you should use a bee brush. So I try to use it sparingly. I don't want to agitate the bees, but sometimes you do just have to move them along a little bit. In the next shot, you'll see using the smoker, blowing that smoke down into the hive. And then you'll see another shot. Of course, I'm wearing my bee suit there also. It's 3 layers of netting so that the bees can't sting through that. It has an elastic bottom. It has elastic cuffs at my wrists. And then, of course, a screened-in veil so that you can see what you're doing and so that the bees don't get to you. You always want to wear light clothes when you're working with bees. You don't want to look like a bear. The bees are programmed to attack any large, dark animal. It is a little bit of a thrill. Occasionally, a bee will climb up your legs while you're working, bees that are in the grass, and they'll get under that elastic around your waist and travel up your back without you knowing it, and you'll have bees flying around inside of the veil. Doesn't usually happen too often, but it is always a thrill when it does. So we're going to stop right here, and now that we've talked about the tools and history of beekeeping, the next session we're going to talk about how we install a package of bees and then release that important queen into the hive to do the job. So join us on the next show for more about beekeeping. This is Dave Willauer saying, make it a great day or not. The choice is yours.